Every language goes through some sort of evolution, whether it's a big evolution, small, or just neutral, it doesn't really affect anything at all. Maybe the only exception to this evolution of languages is Sentinelese, but I'm sure even they have some sort of evolution over time. One of the most common types of evolution in languages, though, is simplification, removing words or characters that are deemed to be unnecessary, overcomplicated, or just a waste of time. If you've looked at any of these charts in Japanese before, you've probably had that feeling of wanting things to be simplified. And you would not be alone. Even people in their own native languages want stuff to be simplified all the time. They especially probably want it to be simplified because they have to use it on a daily basis. There is also de-evolutions too, though, and I think they're pretty interesting, especially the one that I'll talk about at the end of this video. And I think it nicely ties into Japanese culture as well, because I think only a few other countries could devolve in this sort of way that they did. But I will start with a positive and widely recognized evolution. That evolution being ra抜き言葉. Ra抜きbasically stands for ra dropping, or removing the ra sound. If you look at this chart here, you can see the ra. And also take a careful look between the ichidan and the godan verbs. You'll notice at the middle and the right, the ichidan verb is repetitive, while the godan is not. The passive and the potential being the same isn't perfect. So what's happened over time, and is actually still happening to this day, is that the ra is getting dropped. Specifically for the potential, you'll notice that it still stays in the passive. And the godan actually remains unaffected, because if you look at the chart again, you'll notice that the godan was actually differentiated the whole time. It was only the ichidan for some reason that was repetitive. This is why I call it an evolution, because it does actually benefit something. Even though a character is being removed, it still does help the speakers of the language. And like many simplifications, it did start in spoken language, though it has been adapted to written, just not as much as spoken. And I think it is important to note that while it is widely used, it's still not considered correct, which we do have things like that in English as well. If you ever remembered saying something like, me and him did blank, you would remember your teacher got really angry and would say, no, it's he and I, not me and him. So that's just something like that, where nobody would bat an eye in a casual conversation. However, a teacher or maybe your boss would get a little mad. Specifically teachers, I remember them going on rants about incorrect grammar like that. Changes like these are really cool because over time you can see how much time is saved. Many simplifications like these have already happened in every language. And if you go back before those simplifications happened, you can see how much it does actually help, both for ease of speaking and just clarity in general. Anyways, let's move on to the de-evolution because I think this one is even more interesting than the evolution. This de-evolution isさ入れ言葉. Sa ire basically just means to enter in a sa. And that's basically just because they add in the character. I call this one a de-evolution because not only does it make something more complicated, but it's actually just completely unnecessary. It makes something take more time to say or read while adding nothing really. The reason people do this is because it sounds more polite, which is kind of funny to me because as I said, I think it does tie nicely into Japanese culture where politeness is just so important. You're basically wasting time just so that you can seem more polite. And as I kind of already said, unlike the last one, it really doesn't solve any problem at all, and it more so just creates one. There's no ambiguity that it fixes, and it might just make your professional boss very angry. From what I've read, the thought process is basically more words equals more polite. You could kind of get the idea behind that if you ever looked at really polite speech in Japanese, because it just adds a bunch of characters on. So what's one more to make it more polite, I guess? And although it might come from a good place, this one is considered just purely wrong. While the last one could be considered slang or a shortcut, this is purely incorrect. And what I said before about your boss getting mad about this one, there is actually keigo guides that advise against this. They specifically state do not add the sa, as it will not be correct, and that it's not good keigo. So I guess this shows effort does not always make you correct. And if you couldn't tell, this one is a lot less common. There was actually really nothing I could find on the English-speaking internet, and I had to find most of the stuff on Japanese sites. Though there does seem to be plenty of debate about it. There is actually one more evolution that I want to slip in here, and that's dropping the e in teiru forms, or the ongoing form, because who wants to pronounce an extra character? I don't know if I would consider this an evolution or a de-evolution. I say I don't know if it's a de-evolution or an evolution because I can't really tell if there's any harm done. It doesn't seem like there is to me, but it also doesn't really fix anything. Removing the ra and ra抜きwords, it does actually add something. It clears up some ambiguity. However, the E doesn't really add anything, and it just maybe quickens up something. It helps you say something a little faster or type something a little faster. So I'll leave that one in the in-between. You could do it if you want to, but it doesn't really do much good. Whoa, this is a very different place now. I found one or two more things that I wanted to add, and also the video is really short on time. I ended up cutting out like 10 minutes of it somehow. I'm not really sure, honestly, where it went, but I thought I was going to have way more. So I did find these couple of things here. 2 of them on each side. I don't know why I wrote them so far apart. There's, on each side, there is a lost characters, and then there's also a tallying system, which the tallying system doesn't really fit the evolution thing. I don't know why I put that in here. Anyways, so far in the video, I talked about evolution and simplification. However, evolution and simplification don't purely have to be with words. They can also come with the writing system. I'm talking about purely adding and removing characters from a writing system. You may already know these if you had the question of why are there missing boxes in the katakana and hiragana charts. And if you did have that curiosity, you do probably know about these already. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you look at a hiragana or a katakana chart, there will be these little missing boxes of where you would think characters should be. However, they're just not really characters there. And these 2 characters are what used to fill some of those gaps at least. There is a lot more than 2 gaps though. I haven't looked at the other empty spaces, but as far as these 2 go, the only reason they changed is because over time, people just stopped pronouncing them the same way. Basically, these are pronounced we and we, or were at least. The reason they were dropped from the writing system is because people just stopped pronouncing the consonants in them. And over time, they just started being pronounced the same way as E or A. So there was really no distinction between them, and there was no point in keeping them in the language that way. That's why during reforms of the writing system, they were just removed completely. And now the words that once used these just now use E and A, effectively taking their place. And although they were removed from the writing system, they're still technically characters, and they do even work on the computer. And because of that fact, people do still use them in names. For instance, ebisu beer could actually be webisu beer. From what I read, I believe they kept that because of traditionality, and it makes it seem more old-timey, and maybe gives people a more nostalgic feel of ebisu beer. And it could show how historical the company is. Sue Hirogaruzu. That, I believe, is the name of a comedy duo. They use the Wei character to be unique and different, which I find pretty cool. So even though they're not used in the way they once were, it still is cool that they remain in some sort of way. And even though Wei lost its character, it is still written in katakana. As seen here, it's used in certain words and onomatopoeia, which is cool, but I think they should bring back the character, because that would be even cooler. Anyways, the one thing I wrote here was the tallying system that Japanese uses. Or at least from what I've seen, they use it. I'm not honestly sure how widespread it is. Basically, to tally, you would end up writing something like this, which I find a little bit better than the English one, where you have 4 here, and then maybe it's a little bit hard to distinguish between 3 and 4. However, with the Japanese, it's clear which one is 3. That's 3, and then 4. So I think having that little bit of separation is actually really cool. And I also saw, I believe Brazil has their own way of doing a square, which I'm not sure why we haven't adapted onto one of those yet, because they do seem a little bit easier when you have a lot of tallies to read. Anyways though, thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe. I'm sorry about whatever's going on here. I couldn't figure out the button here, because there's a button, but it doesn't really connect to anything. So, well, it does, but I don't know. Never mind. I put this on because I thought it would be fancy for the whiteboard, because the whiteboard's very professional, and this is like the only colored shirt I have. So I put it on to look fancy. Anyways though, thank you for watching again. Bye-bye. Like and subscribe. Thanks.